A strong engine block is the foundation of every powerful and long-lived turbocharged engine. And today I'm going to show you in detail the process of building the engine block I'll be using in my turbocharged engine. Additionally, we'll be adding up the costs of all the elements in the build to see exactly how much a strong, fully machined assembled engine block with all new parts costs. The engine I'm building is a modest 1.6 liter Toyota 4A FE whose power output I'm planning to triple by turbocharging it. The planned application is street and track driving, which means that this is an enthusiast level build and has such a budget. As I didn't want to remove the existing engine out of my car in the interest of keeping it on the road as long as possible, I decided to buy a junkyard engine instead and build that. Obviously, the first step towards building a block is to completely disassemble the engine and remove all the internals from the engine block. As you can see, we are working with a pretty old school closed-deck cast iron engine block. Although cast iron blocks are heavier than their aluminum counterparts, they are a good choice for turbo builds due to their increased strength and rigidity, which requires no or minimal reinforcement to cope with high amounts of boost. Once the block is disassembled, the next step I have taken is to do all the necessary machining. And this includes boring and honing the cylinders for 0.5mm oversized pistons and decking the block to achieve a perfectly flat surface for the head gasket. Another type of machining that is often done is align honing, and it looks like this. This ensures that all the main bearing tunnels are of equal size and in perfect alignment with each other. Although many machine shops in my area offer this service, I decided against doing it because all of my main bearing tunnels were within spec. Align honing is in general good practice, but it requires a lot of operator skill and all the tools to be equally worn. I have seen some negative experiences from align honing that unfortunately did more harm than good, so after taking into account my current measurements and the difficulty of finding Toyota 4A blocks, I decided to not take chances and leave things as they are. I also machined the block to allow the fitment of oil squirters. This is not something that is typically done, and it did create some minor damage on the block which needed to be welded up, but more on this later in the video. After all the machining was complete, I decided to remove all the loose surface rust on the block to prepare it for painting later on. But what's much more important than rust on the outside is cleanliness of the block on the inside. There will be a lot of metal shavings and dust after machining, as well as grime and other debris from previous engine operation. This is why cleaning the engine block as thoroughly as possible is incredibly important for any engine build. Any metal shavings or other foreign matter left inside the block can cause engine damage and ruin your investment. I clean the block by spraying gasoline under pressure into every nook and cranny. Gasoline is a good solvent and helps remove old oil gunk and grime, and it also flushes out metal particles. It is especially important to clean every engine oil passageway. These can be found at the oil filter location, at all the main bearings, as well as inside the block going to the cylinder head. Another extremely important area to clean is the main oil gallery. In my case, it's even more important because I have drilled holes and cut threads into the main oil gallery, resulting in a massive amount of metal shavings inside it. The inside of the gallery is accessed via two plugs on either side of it. Sometimes these plugs can take a bit of persuasion, but they should come out using a bit of heat and good quality Allen wrenches. Once you have cleaned the block thoroughly and feel that it's clean it out again for good measure. The next step after cleaning is to paint the block. This is of course completely optional, and the surface rust you can see on cast iron blocks has no impact on anything. But because I want to shoot pretty pictures of my engine for social media, I decided to paint it. Although I have removed as much surface rust as possible, it's of course impossible to completely remove it, and you can't really paint over rust. So I decided to use a rust converter, which chemically converts the rust into a suitable surface for painting. I have used a Würth rust converter which I used on various projects before. It's lightly brushed on and left for 48 hours to cure. Of course, you can use any other suitable rust converter of your choice, and here are the results after the converter has done its thing. As you can see, it works pretty well and it sort of deactivates all the rust. Once the rust conversion was complete, I painted the block using POR 15 engine enamel. This is also brushed on. It's very thick and a bit hard to work with, but it's surprisingly forgiving, and it settles into a nice even coat that's very strong and resistant to scratching, oil, fuel and other chemicals. Once the painting is complete, it's time to focus on the engine internals. Here we can see the stock engine internals versus what I'll be replacing them with. The stock pistons are cast, and although there's nothing wrong with them, they had to be upgraded to OEM semi-forged pistons to cope with the increased combustion pressure and heat generated by turbocharging. I have a detailed video on these pistons explaining what semi-forged actually means. There's links to that in the description. Although they are not a typical fully forged piston, they have successfully proven themselves in builds putting out as much as 600 horsepower. The additional benefit is that you can run a tighter piston-to-wall clearance, which avoids piston slap associated with fully forged pistons, which can help extend the life of the engine. I also like using OEM stuff whenever possible, as the cost can be pretty reasonable for some things and quality is very high and consistent. These semi-forged pistons are actually originally for the 1.6 supercharged 4AG-ZE engine as found on the Toyota MR2 Mark I. As you can see, they are dished compared to the stock pistons, which works to decrease the compression ratio to a number more suitable for boost. When it comes to the connecting rods, I replaced the stock connecting rods with a set of max speeding rods 4340 forged steel connecting rods. Although the wide parting line on the stock rods tells us that they are also forged, they are not obviously 4340 steel and have a much smaller cross-sectional area, resulting in a much weaker connecting rod that would create a failure risk under high boost. On top of this, the max speeding rods feature ARP 2000 connecting rod bolts, which are a dramatic improvement over the archaic stock shoulder bolts. The only minor downside of the new setup is that it's a few grams heavier than the stock setup. However, I'm not building a super high revving naturally aspirated engine here, and the marginal increase in weight is a small price to be paid for the dramatic increase in strength. Something that the stock on rods have is this oil hole which sprays oil up into the cylinder. Now the max speeding rods don't have this, just like the majority of aftermarket forged rods, which is one of the reasons why I added oil squirters into the block. Another important difference between the stock and updated setup is the pressed piston pin on the stock side and a fully floating piston pin on the updated parts. Although a pressed piston pin eliminates the need for snap rings, it's an obsolete solution in terms of lubrication and performance, and it's something that you won't find on more modern car engines. When it comes to the max speeding rods, I have extensively checked the large end bore sizing of these rods and found that they were within spec. However, I didn't have the tools to check the small end bore and I left that to my engine builder. We found that the small end bushing bores were undersized compared to the needed factory specs by around 0.02 mm. Of course, this needed to be addressed by resizing the small end bushing bore of the rod. Fortunately, this is easy to do with the right tool. The bore was enlarged using a hand reamer with a specific size to create a desired fitment for our bushing. This looks easy, but it's actually very tricky and requires a lot of skill in a very steady hand and one-way rotation. I would also strongly recommend against the usage of adjustable reamers, as they require even more skill to get things right and can cause damage more easily. Simply use a fixed reamer of the right size. As you can see, after enlargement, the piston pin fitment is now absolutely perfect with zero play. After the small bores have been enlarged, it was time to join the rods and pistons. Although these are brand new parts that have never seen engine operation, it's still a good idea to clean them thoroughly before assembly. The first step is to install the snap rings, which prevent the piston pin from sliding out of the piston. Each piston has 2 of these, but we're installing only one to act as a limiter for the piston pin during the install. Since the pistons are in direct contact with combustion heat, they expand much more during operation than connecting rods do. This means that their cold fit with the piston pin is tighter than the fit of the pin and the connecting rod, which is why pistons must be warmed up to about 80 degrees Celsius to install the piston pin. Once the pistons are warm enough, simply push the pin all the way in through the piston and the rod. The final step is to install the other snap ring. Always direct the snap ring opening towards the top of the piston. The reason behind this is that the movement of the piston constantly applies up and down forces on the snap ring. If the snap ring is on its side, this can compress it, which ruins its fitment with the piston and can even cause it to fall out of its groove, leading to engine failure. If the snap ring opening points upward, then the up and down forces trying to compress it will actually expand it outwards and will not affect its fitment negatively. The next key component of the internals is obviously the crankshaft, and here you can see the stock 4AFE crankshaft side by side with a brand new OEM Toyota late model 4AGE crankshaft. The 4AFE crankshaft isn't bad by any means. It's forged, which means that it's pretty strong, and it's fully counterweighted, which means that it will not flex at high RPM. However, the 4AGE crankshaft has a few key advantages that made it more desirable for my build. First of all, the crank pin size is larger at 42 mm, which obviously makes the crank a bit more beefy, but more importantly, it gives me access to a wide variety of aftermarket connecting rods that don't exist for the smaller crank pin size of the 4AFE engine. This also means that I can use all sorts of different 4AGE pistons, as well as the fully floating piston pins present in all late model 4AGE conrods. The only way to do this with the stock 4AFE crankshaft would be to use custom con rods and pistons, which would actually cost more than a brand new 4AGE crankshaft. The 4AGE crankshaft is also obviously forged and induction hardened and has been tried and tested on hundreds upon hundreds of engine builds and proven capable of surviving in excess of 600 horsepower. Whenever you're trying to build a strong engine block, it's always a good idea to minimize risks by using things that many others have tried before you. It's cool to be a trailblazer, but sometimes it can be very expensive and time-consuming. Another important benefit of the 4AGE crankshaft is the oiling holes. As you can see, it has 2 oiling holes as compared to only 1 on the stock 4AFE crankshaft. This ensures better and more consistent lubrication at the expense of a very minor reduction in oil pressure. Now we're finally moving on to the oil squirters. They consist of a nozzle and a valve located inside this bolt. The valve ensures that the nozzles spray oil only when oil pressure is high enough, which means that they do not negatively affect oil pressure. Here you can also see all the part numbers. Now, due to the architecture of the block, the nozzle for cylinder number 3 has a different orientation and thus a different part number, but obviously otherwise it's exactly the same. These nozzles can be found in later model small port 4AGE and 4AGZE engines whose blocks are already properly machined to accept them from the factory. Unfortunately, these blocks are almost impossible to obtain in Europe, and obviously shipping a block across oceans costs a small fortune, which is why I decided to modify my existing block instead. Fortunately, my 4AFE block is also a later casting and thus has the suitable locations for the nozzles minus the holes and threads. So using internet photos as reference, I got a machine shop to make the main holes and threads as well as the small holes for the mounting tabs to prevent the squirters from rotating once they're bolted down. The damage to the block occurred when this surface right here was flattened for the nozzles. The flattening is done with a pretty large tool, and then this tool made a small hole on the side of the block. The block material is actually extremely thin right here, which is why this happened in the first place, but fortunately this part isn't under any sort of significant load and it was professionally welded up, so other than the ugliness, it didn't really impact the block in any way. The squirters were necessary in my case because the rods lack an oiling hole, but they're also a good idea on any sort of turbocharged build. They're not only good for lubrication, but they also help keep piston temperatures in check by cooling their undersides with fresh oil. By doing this, they also help prevent knock and allow a greater margin for performance. Their positive effects can be further improved by adding an oil cooler, which is also something I'm planning to do. However, because the nozzle locations were eyeballed based on internet photos, they didn't actually properly clear the crankshaft. You can actually hear the crank hitting the bolts here. Fortunately, this was fixable by grinding the bolt heads a bit and carefully and skillfully bending the nozzle tubes a bit. Because the engine block and its internals can actually flex and move under heavy loads, we decided to be extra safe and use Play-Doh to verify that there was at least 2 mm of clearance between the crankshaft and the nozzles and the bolts. The next step was to notch the pistons to ensure that they don't make contact with the nozzle tubes. The first step was to test fit the piston against the nozzle. We then marked the piston where the nozzle contacted the piston with a small dab of paint and then gently and carefully ground a bit of material away to ensure proper clearance. Once all of this was done, the next step was to check the piston ring end gap. Our initial gap on the first compression ring was a bit small for the boost I'm planning to run, so we enlarged it. The second compression and the oil rings were okay out of the box, so we didn't touch them. After this, it was time for final assembly. We first very thoroughly cleaned everything once again because we fiddled around the block a lot and did a lot of test fitting after the last cleaning. After the cleaning, the first step is obviously to install the main bearings. I'm using King racing bearings as these have proven themselves in thousands of builds. If you can't find racing bearings, regular ones will do just fine as long as your clearances are verified and correct. The right clearance is far more important than the type of the bearing. As I have already said, the 4A is a closed deck cast iron block and it also has a pretty deep skirt, so it's definitely not weak. Nevertheless, my plan is to dramatically increase the power output compared to stock, so some reinforcement was in order. To this end, I replaced the stock main bolts with ARP studs. Head studs and main studs are superior over bolts because they don't twist during tightening, which gives more accurate torque values and more accurate and consistent clamping forces. My original plan was to also use one of the excellent main girdles made for the 4AGE engine by Man on Racing product in New Zealand. But after consulting them, I decided against it because the main bores need to be align honed with the girdle bolted in place, and I already explained my align honing situation. Instead, for my power level, Manual Racing Products offers a more convenient and more affordable solution in the form of these main cap reinforcements. They provide an additional layer of support for the main cap, which prevents it from going out of round and distorting during massive loads. You can't see these on my engine in this video yet because I'm waiting for local customs to clear them, but they're actually super easy to install later on as well. Once the crankshaft is bolted down, the last step is obviously to install the piston rings and then to orientate them properly. After this, the pistons are installed into the block and conrod caps are also installed and torqued down according to specs. And here it is in all its glory. One block ready for boost. And here are also all the costs added up. As you can see, it's a relatively substantial sum, but I guess that's the price for minimizing risk and hopefully maximizing engine performance and longevity. So the foundation for this build has been laid, and in the coming episodes we'll be continuing the build series by adding more and more parts and all sorts of custom stuff to make the Turbo 4AFE MR2 a reality. So I guess that's pretty much it for today. As always, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon with more fun and useful stuff on the D4A channel.